Hello, good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello, Mr. Mawere, how are you?
How are you?
I'm all right.
So we have Elias and you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Is that Mr. Mabaso?
Yes, that's Mabaso. Yes.
Hello, Nolin.
We're waiting for Dr. Chatiza.
All right. So I think the broadcast has already started. So
Mr. Mabaso, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
but your voice is very far, it's very faint.
Yes, maybe fix the volume.
Ms. Mabaso,
Hello.
yeah, your volume is faint.
My volume is faint. Okay, let me see here. Oh, but it's at maximum. I don't know why.
Yeah, now
Getting
it's
better.
It's getting better.
Yeah.
Okay, let me move closer to the speaker there. Yeah, I tried to put it at maximum.
Okay.
All right. All right. So
yeah, I'm just trying to speak to Dr. Chatiza to join the stream as well. All right. While we wait for Dr. Chatiza to come through, maybe we can just proceed. Maybe Mr. Mawere, you would like to start, and then I can introduce the program.
all right. Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon to all. And if you are watching out there, this is one of the programs brought to you by Africa MINDSHIFT in collaboration with the 1873 network, using radio as a bridge to broaden and deepen understanding on issues, on matters of mutual interest. And one of those areas is the typical question that is asked about Africa. What time is it in Africa? People think Africa is dark. The things that are done by individuals, sometimes they don't get expression in the public social media outlets. So as we look at Africa using one lens, you may find that actually we don't know each other. And were it not for this initiative, people would not know who is who. So raising awareness becomes a challenge. How do you talk to yourself in this digital age when we are all connected and we need content? So good afternoon or good morning, Dr. Chatiza. Welcome. And Mr. Mabaso and the host, Mr. Wellington Muzengeza. Welcome to this intro where we are talking about connections being communities. Already there is a community of Africa mindset. And we are also introducing you to the initiative in which Mr. Wellington Muzengeza is part of, called Connections to Communities under this 1873. So I was going to do a quiz for Mr. Mabaso. What is 1873 to you?
Wow, 1873. No idea, Mr. Mawere,
No idea.
Yeah,
I like somebody who says no idea. Are you interested in the idea of 1873?
very much so.
1 plus 8?
That's 9.
7 plus 3?
That's 10.
And the difference?
That's 3.
No.
The
10
difference
minus 9.
Yes, that's 1.
1. What is the power of 1?
The power of 1 is 1.
The power of 1 is you, that
Yes.
you are not divisible to half Elias, half Mabaso. Although you may have two names, the same name and the first name, middle name, you are still you. You are indivisible. So when we come together as a community, it doesn't mean you collapse into the community. It means you still remain you still remain you. So we celebrate the person and what the person can do in the context of others. So one individual counts. So that is what we have set up as an initiative that allows people to collapse into one cause without evaporating. And when people come together, the outcome is always bigger than the sum of the individuals in the one. So one becomes more than one. The individual can't multiply, but together the outcome can be multiplied. So we're just warming up for Dr. Chatiza. Okay, so that's where we are. And I don't know whether you want me to add more. Dr. Chatiza, you may not know what we're talking about. We're talking about converting connections to communities.
Okay. That's interesting.
And I don't know whether you've heard the C2C initiative.
No, I've not heard it. We learned about it today from Wellington via a WhatsApp message, but I had not interacted with the details of it.
The idea is that when we come together and we exchange insights, knowledge, experiences, ideas, then that provokes, inspires, ignites the human spirit to do something. But fragmented, we become invisible in the individual efforts. So
that makes a lot of sense.
I guess it's the connection down here in Harare.
Yeah, that's so that's where we are. So Dr. Chatiza, that's what Wellington has been working on. Apart from this initiative of Africa Mind Shift, and we call it paradigm shift. That when people come together, the eyes see further than one eye or two eyes.
Indeed.
And when you meet, then you make more noise than what an individual can make. So this platform is called StreamYard, and we are broadcasting on about 7 different platforms. We have Wellington's page, we have YouTube, we have other Facebook pages, all in one.
All right.
So you can then take the link to share with others. So before we're talking...
thank you so much, Mr. Mawere. I see
Okay,
Dr.
thanks.
Chatiza's connection has gone down. I hope mine won't do the same again.
Okay, so you can proceed here. So you can proceed.
Who's starting?
I can start because I can make.
All right. Before you start, let me just introduce the Africa MINDSHIFT dialogue series. It's the brainchild of the Africa MINDSHIFT Trust, which is a policy dialogue initiative. So what Africa MINDSHIFT does is that it's an organization that is founded here in Zimbabwe, and it's but with an operational footprint here in Zimbabwe, Southern Africa, and beyond. What we want is that we believe in active citizenship and community power to solve problems, and that technologies are the gateway into a new Africa as we go. But then what we aim to stimulate conversation and dialogue on policy, and we also would like to highlight key development issues, advocate for policy reforms, and also to contribute to planning reforms and social science research. All right. So this online policy dialogue series is going to be the first of a series that is going to be conducted weekly with different panelists with different expertise, subject matter expertise as well. So this is the first of many that is going to come. All right. Today our discussion is going to be on peri-urban development around Harare, the trends, the promise, and the challenges. Now, our discussion is going to focus on how peri-urban lifestyles. Well, actually, maybe the background is that in Harare, we have seen, in Zimbabwe in general, actually, in the last 20 to 25 years, the macroeconomic situation has deteriorated in one way or another, which has resulted in Zimbabweans finding different livelihood survival strategies to survive this economy. And one of the challenges they have faced along the way is actually the problem of housing. So Zimbabweans have been observed now to come up with different ways of solving the housing problem. Then there's also been the way where Zimbabweans have been trying to diversify their survival strategies as well. So in that process, we have seen a migration of people in Harare migrating from the traditional dormitory townships of Chitungwiza, Budiriro, Kwadzana, and others. They've been migrating to peri-urban areas which are rural in character. Areas like Domboshawa, we have seen migration to areas like Goromonzi and Jimba. So we'd like to put the spotlight on those type of migration that we have observed. But as we go through the discussion with our panelists, we would also like to interrogate a few issues about what type of people are doing this, and what survival strategies have they started on, and or are they engaging to diversify their survival strategies. What type of land are they acquiring? How are they acquiring it? And what is the tenure of that land that they are acquiring? So these are some of the discussions that we're going to discuss to look at today with our panelists. So I would like to introduce our panelists, or maybe they should introduce themselves. Maybe we start with Dr. Chatiza.
My name is Chatiza. I work as a development researcher and consultant based in Harare. And my areas
Hello,
of interest
Dr. Chatiza.
are
May you
local
please introduce yourself?
I am.
I think Dr.
Is
Chatiza has
is
gone
my mic off?
offline there. Maybe Mr. Elias Mabaso, please tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, I was hearing Dr. Chatiza quite well. I don't know what's wrong with your internet.
Okay, I think we're having a bit of a challenge there with our connection. Dr. Chatiza, are you still there? Can you hear me?
I am. I can hear you.
All right, Doc. May you please introduce yourself, or should I introduce you?
Go ahead, introduce me.
Hello, Dr. Chatiza.
Okay, my name is
We're having challenges
Chatiza.
with our connection to our panelists. Please bear with us. We hope the network connection improves. All right, Dr. Chatiza, I'm going to introduce you. Dr. Chatiza is the director of the Development Governance Institute in Harare. He's a development researcher and consultant with over 25 years experience. He also lectures part-time at the University of Zimbabwe and the Midlands State University. He's joining us from Waterfalls in Harare. And Mr. Elias Mabaso, from New York, is an academic and practitioner with over 20 years experience. His experience is in environmental planning, disaster risk management, and humanitarian issues. He has worked for various organizations that includes the UN departments, Save the Children UK, the Zimbabwe National Parks. His research interests are on urban informality, resilience, and disaster risk management. He's busy working on the final. He's busy finalizing his PhD thesis. All right. So those are our panelists. Maybe we'd like to start with you, Dr. Chatiza. May you please put us up to speed with what are the trends that have been happening in terms of peri-urban developments in Harare, in a nutshell.
Okay. Thank you very much, Wellington, and thank you for the opportunity to share my insights on peri-urban developments in and around Harare. And I think I would like to start by drawing people's attention to even the 5 years before independence, in 1976. There is a settlement which was called the Chirambahuyo, just outside the boundary, the former boundary of Harare, where it kind of gets into the territory where Chitungwiza starts. Over a 3-month period between August and October of 1976, Chirambahuyo grew from about 200 households to more than 12,000. And those that did a study, including Patel and Adams, who published something in 1981, suggested that the two push factors that pulled people in a way to Chirambahuyo. And I want to share this as a basis for the rest of the conversation in relation to peri-urban development, because the growth of the population in Chirambahuyo was a response to some of the stretched economic performance of the Salisbury economy at that time, which was constraining housing delivery in terms of access to affordable housing, which at that time was largely also provided by the state, both local and national. So the stretched economy was beginning to leak jobs. People were losing jobs, and their livelihoods were being again strained in the urban economy. And there was a sense in which human security was now being compromised. At the same time, you also had the municipality or the city of Harare being unable to meet the demand for housing, for African housing in this particular instance. And therefore, the constrained delivery in terms of formal access to formal housing created cases of overcrowding. And in a period where people were unable to meet their housing and other basic needs, the search for alternative accommodation began. And Chirambahuyo provided a site where accommodation was considered to be cheaper. Access was also considered to be easier. So hence the growth in the 3-month period that I made reference to. So what we are seeing in areas like Dombosha, Wazimba, and Goromonzi are things that have been happening over time around our urban settlements. And it's not just Harare, it's also other settlements in Zimbabwe, urban settlements in Zimbabwe, as well as outside Zimbabwe. So it's a trend that we need to understand as a process that happens because costs are rising and an economy is unable to meet the demand for jobs and therefore is unable to sustain livelihoods. So the people that are going to Goromonzi, the people that are going to even areas outside Chitumbiza in Seke Dema area, as well as people that are looking for housing in Zimba, in the outskirts of the boundary of Harare, are people that are predominantly Harare residents that are seeking alternative land. And it's not all of them are the urban poor. Some of them are also lower to upper middle income residents of the city who are finding alternative access methods for cheaper land on which they are going to be developing. So what is important is for us to acknowledge that peri-urban development is an ongoing process. One of the key challenges we have, for instance, in terms of regulating and managing it, in terms of even planning responses, is because the city of Harare in this particular instance and the rural local authorities that are surrounding it are not effectively coordinating in terms of managing the responses to that influx of residents from Harare. So I think most planners are unable to track the socio-economic drivers of peri-urban access to land and peri-urban development. And as a result, we ask ourselves questions about who are the people that are administering those lands. And in most instances, apart from Zimba, for instance, in Goromonzi, Domboshawa area and Seke area, the land onto which people are going and settling is communal land. And therefore, land administrators involved in that are traditional leaders, but also the landowners themselves that are formally or informally subdividing their pieces of land and selling in terms of responding to a demand for land. So that is important for us to acknowledge. The second point to acknowledge is the fact that there's considerable human agency in terms of the institutions that are involved in access to land in those communal areas, but also the institutions in terms of Harare in this instance, also being unable to respond to the kind of housing demand that is growing very exponentially, and Harare also lacking available land onto which it can also steer housing development for low-income housing. So it's a combination of public institutions being in a position where they are unable to respond to the demand, but on the other hand, you also then have communal areas. It's not as if there's no density in terms of demand for land in those communal areas, but there's an opportunity that is arising because there are urban areas that are unable to provide housing for people that have some cash that they can utilize. Second, and perhaps the last point that I want to make at this point, is the fact that people are also continuing with some form of dual existence. They may be having homes in Goromonzi, Zimba, and Seke, but they still maintain economic activities in Harare or Chitumbiza. So there is a bit of commuting for some of the residents that are acquiring land in communal or in peri-urban areas. So it's almost as if the social economy of some of the urban centers is being stretched into neighboring peri-urban areas. And the links continue from an economic perspective, but also in terms of social activities. Maybe for now I can stop here so that we can have Mr. Mabaso also making a contribution, and then we can take it forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Chatiza, for the preliminary presentation there. Now, Mr. Mabaso, we in terms of what are the issues resultant thereof in these peri-urban transitions that we see in terms of migration, in terms of the disasters or hazards, risks, vulnerability, and resilience? What are the implications? Because the peri-urban has generally been considered as a hazard or a disaster zone.
Thank you, Wellington, and thank you, Dr. Chatiza, for giving that historical overview of the development. I'm not going to bother you, of course, with all the technicalities, especially on what constitutes peri-urban, the definition challenges that are there, but I will look at it from a disaster framework, that is the disaster risk reduction. And as Wellington has highlighted, the peri-urban area is generally referred to or considered as a disaster risk zone. In other words, in terms of hazards, in terms of vulnerability, in terms of capacities, exposure, and also the issue of resilience. So this is one of the areas that has been underestimated in terms of the impact on development. And if you look at Harare, you find this multi-dimensional nature and interaction of various hazards, whether physical, natural, or socio-economic hazards. They've got a bearing in terms of how the development in the peri-urban areas take place. Some of the critical issues which are common, if you go to areas around Harare, as you go towards Zimba and the like, there are clear environmental hazards that are due to either extraction. There's a lot of construction in Harare. So when they go and extract sand for building, quarry stones, brick molding, they tend to move to these peri-urban zones. And because of the governance issues, which I will tackle later, it's almost like a no-man's zone at times, whereby people tend to utilize the resources and they might not be contributing to the development of the city of Harare directly by paying levies or to the local authority, again, which can become a little bit problematic. So people take advantage of this at the times weak integration or planning system between the urban local authority and the rural local authority, so that they extract resources. The peri-urban becomes only a zone of extraction, at times with very little. So in terms of the hazards trend, while we can talk of environmental hazards, there are so many things that are known. For example, go to Kroil as you move towards Goromonzi and the surrounding areas. Water extraction or water harvesting, people digging a lot of deep wells as well as sinking boreholes. But what type of information do we have to know whether the water table is receding and what are the other downstream effects of this water extraction, not only in the city of Harare, but the surrounding rural areas there? What are the other issues that relate to, for example, urban agriculture? Because that's an area whereby you would find informal urban agriculture still going on. People can sell or bring commodities to Harare because it's so close to it there. And then as a result, what are the implications in terms of the material that is used, whether they are fertilizers downstream, whether it's in Manyame Dam or the surrounding areas there. There are also issues that we need to look at in terms of the hazards, not only the urban agriculture and the pollution. One of the disturbing issues is those who have gone to areas where towards Zimba, might not be very clear of the name, where there's so much extraction, brick molding, and quarrying. You find so many of these trucks that are parked there, and they carry bricks, sand, quarries almost every day through the city of Harare. The impact on the road networks and how much are they contributing towards the development of the road network in Harare, while they extract material from the peri-urban area. So the peri-urban being more of a resource extraction zone, causing a lot of negative impact on Harare and its surrounding. What are the systems that are in place that would be required in order to promote that type of development? There are also other epidemiological hazards, for example, depending on how you look at the peri-urban. If the water itself, at times is not treated, some areas around, Mabuku, Tafara, and the like, where you would find, if you trace the history of cholera outbreak, in some of these areas that could be close to the peri-urban zones, whether it's Caledonia Farm, and depending on what you consider to be the peri-urban, whether you're looking at the physical boundary, the function of the city, and the like there. So it is almost an area which has got a lot of possible hazards that, if not addressed, they've got a bearing on socio-economic development of the city of Harare. And I think the two critical issues that I'm going to highlight is, bringing why it is taking, why are these challenges? I find that the first one is more of the information management system, and Dr. Chatiza referred to somehow in passing, whereby understanding of what are the hazards that affect these areas, whether you're looking at environmental degradation, water abstraction itself, trends in epidemiological hazards, how have they been taking place and what are the causal factors? How are they linked to these peri-urban zones? That type of information might not be available in an integrated manner, whereby we do the monitoring of information, updating of the information, so as to inform policy and planning and development. So that has been a challenge, especially understanding hazards. If you look at it from a DRR perspective, for example, we know understanding of hazards to be one of the priority areas in terms of the Sendai framework, in terms of how to integrate planning, how to address disasters in order to talk of resilience. So without a proper information management around Harare, the surrounding zones also, what are the trends, what are the main hazards, and what is happening, then it becomes very difficult to have type of planning that will promote development in these areas. The second and last thing that I'm just going to highlight is the issue of governance, which Dr. Chatiza somehow referred to. The Peri-Urban has tended to be almost what he then would call the tragedy of the commons. It's free for all. And people are taking advantage of this fragmented approach in most cases, because you tend to find it that they are in multiple players, land barons, at times the political component of it, taking advantage of that relationship to pass or lend pieces to people who are speculating. And in most cases, because there is limited monitoring of construction. If you go to Kroiro, for example, towards Goromonzi, it's part of Goromonzi, almost becoming part of Greater Harare. People are constructing any type of structures, some of them for manufacturing, and some of them houses and all that. So with this limited monitoring, because of governance system that might not be clearly defined, or lack of monitoring, then it becomes really a challenge to address some of the peri-urban areas challenges, or especially environmental hazards or epidemiological hazards. So I pick these two as critical issues to consider for our planning and development. How do we develop the information management systems to address some of these anomalies? And how do we strengthen the issue of governance, which might lead to integrated planning, of course, between the rural and urban authorities, which might not be the case now as you look at Harare City, Goromonzi, and the surrounding rural area. So that becomes a challenge, which makes us really to look at the peri-urban as almost a free-for-all and a risk in the long run. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mabaso, for your presentation. Your discussion is centered around the issue of governance, as well as the issue of some solutions in terms of integrated planning between the authorities, the rural authorities and urban, as way to mitigating some of these challenges. But then we have noticed also, Mr. Mabaso, that the peri-urban areas have tended to be, as you say, they've tended to be a free-for-all, where we find that people construct as they please. They are involved in various activities like sand mining. There is also vegetation destruction as people look for firewood, and also land barons literally do as they please. Now, as we look at the land tenure, that are land tenure systems that are obtained in there, like Dr. Chatiza alluded that the land is communal in character, and which means that there is no title there. People, the land acquisition processes are traditional in form and nature, where people acquire land through sabukus, through traditional structures. Per se. What are the implications now in terms of the bankability of that land, Dr. Chatiza, and the sustainability of tenure?
Maybe to build up on the point you just made, the areas around the Harare are not all communal. So I think some of the examples that we gave, even what Mr. Mabaso mentioned in terms of Crow Hill, areas where Caledonia is established, some areas to the south of Harare were not necessarily communal. Some of it is land that was acquired post-2000 and handed over to the ministry responsible for local government, the ministry responsible for lands, and therefore it was targeted for, earmarked for urban development. Our focus, I think, in the context of the contribution that I was just making, was informed by your reference to Goromonzi, and I read Goromonzi to mean some of the communal areas. That's why in my examples I was being very specific in terms of then saying if you are talking about the Dema area in Seke, if you are also talking about Domboshava in Goromonzi, then the tenure is communal. And therefore, the land administration in those areas will involve, to a large extent, the traditional leaders. But unfortunately, one of the things that has happened in recent times in our country is that even where we have the proper systems of administering land, both in law as well as in terms of administrative guidelines, some of those have not been fully followed. So, for instance, if someone is looking for communal land, there's a way in which that it eventually leads to a local authority, which is the Rural District Council, issuing a certificate of occupation after they have been provided the access piece of land at a community level based on the decisions that are made by a village assembly or such other policy-making structure. So those systems are not working as they ought to. And as a result, you have a sense of informality in the way in which the land is being allocated. That's for communal land. But in terms of land that was acquired under fast track land reform program, the ministry responsible for local government worked through a variety of models. But I think this is where the stewardship that Mr. Mabaso was mentioning, in terms of then who was then taking responsibility for land that was either under development or land awaiting planning and subsequent development. I think the pace at which people occupied the pieces of land was faster than the pace at which it was properly planned for. And in the process, the kind of services that would have been in place in those areas were slower because there was no plan. Or some of the plans were developed while people were already occupying. Hence, the subsequent processes of subdivision and after reallocations and changes in terms of some of the administrative process on the. So we need to separate land that was under freehold and acquired for purposes of urban development, but not necessarily handed over to the city of Harare, which create the jurisdictional overlaps that we were talking about earlier, affecting planning and related aspects. And then communal land that is also administered differently. But I agree with Mabaso on the point of resource extraction. That is generally also very poorly managed or monitored, which has resulted in a lot of open pits and areas that may necessarily be environmental hazards, and also in terms of pollution of other areas, in terms of even the water systems around the Harare region. I think the point I want to also add is that we have cases. That's why I started off with citing the case of Chirambaoyu. We have cases where, for Rua, for instance, Rua can be considered as a peri-urban development that was properly managed in the sense of planning, because there was a private sector, a local authority that ended up doing proper planning before the land was settled. So you have a sense in which that can also be a basis upon which we can explain the haphazardness in some of the areas where local authorities, Harare and the adjacent local authority responsible for the pieces of land in question, were not necessarily working together to make sure that planning, development, supervision, development control, and placement of services was properly coordinated. What if the case of Epworth, for instance, where I think over the last 10 to 15 years, they've been in the process of replanning and regularizing certain areas that were informally occupied, and then subsequently plans were developed while people were on the ground. So we have a situation where the nature of the authorities that are responsible for the planning and development of those way in which they interact with the residents that are on the pieces of land that have been occupied affects the extent to which both resource extraction that Mr. Mabaso was making reference to, as well as the actual related those areas, can proceed. So you end up with a situation where if like what happened in Caledonia, where the occupation and the development was for a long period of time managed without direct state involvement of both national and local government, you end up with a process where the state is coming rather late and then getting into a process of regularization and that the area is properly serviced and developed. But by then, the services that should have been planned for and placed were already late, and hence the challenge that we have. So the importance of the local authority for the city of Harare is the local authority for the neighboring local authorities, like Zimba, if it's to the west of Harare, Goromonzi to the north and to the east, as well as Seke to the southeast and south. The extent to which they can collaborate around making sure that both natural resource management in those territories, as well as the actual spatial planning and supervision of development in those areas, affect the kind of governance challenge that we are seeing, the fragmented governance that we are seeing, the jurisdictional gaps, which has been occupied by other forms of authority in the form of land developers, both formal and informal, most of which are euphemistically called the land barons, because they ended up being the de facto owners of the pieces of land, and they were allocating it in a way that was the formal authorities in the form of the councils, as well as the ministry responsible for local government. The last point that I want to make in this stage is in terms of the relationship that people have had with land, both those that are in urban areas as well as those that are moving from urban areas to the neighboring rural areas, whether freehold farmland or communal land. I think there's been the point I made earlier around the economy being in the state it is, losing jobs and suffocating livelihoods. The sale of land has become more of an economic activity than ordinarily a way of providing basic services, and therefore doing it in a way that enables local and national authorities to supervise it very clearly. So, because land is now like an economic commodity that is being traded and traded generally informally, is one of the challenges that I think we're having as a country. So, an important observation that I think we need to have to discuss is whether the peri-urban can be defined clearly, both in spatial terms, but also in terms of jurisdictional responsibility, so that we're able to have a process where joint authorities are already provided for at law, and joint authority in terms of planning, development, and supervision are already clearly stated. Because I think what we have at the moment is a situation where maybe for Zimba is the jurisdiction, they are not necessarily working closely with the city of Harare. Goromonzi has a jurisdiction over Caledonia. In terms of overseeing and developing that area, Goromonzi is also perhaps not necessarily working closely with the traditional leaders in areas like Dombosha, and therefore end up with the resource extraction, but also in terms of development, which is poorly regulated. And in the final analysis, the residents end up being shortchanged because the services are developed according to their ambitions. But what is also important is the new economic activities that are occurring in this access to land. So people are doing projects, like I said earlier, they are doing piggery in these peri-urban areas for the urban market. So we need to find a way of acknowledging that, but also then beginning a process of properly facilitating the development in areas in a way that is suited for the land uses in those areas, so that there's no contradiction and therefore undermining of the existing activities, but at the same time connected to the nearby urban economy in such a way that we have rural urban linkages that are properly facilitated and are able to provide just development, equitable development, and sustainable development, which I think is proved to some extent to the disasters that may occur, and people are aware of the risks associated with utilization of certain pieces of land. At the moment, because of one, the pace, and two, the capacity of the institutions, Harare City and other neighboring local authorities, they've really been overrun by the way in which the access to land and the extraction of resources has occurred. Part of it is something that also has been traditionally a weakness of center-local relations in terms of managing some of these peri-urban areas, because some of the land is state land, because it's not yet incorporated into Harare, or then Goromonzi loses a bit of traction in terms of administering that piece of, or Zimba loses traction in terms of administering that land. And during that period, like the example I gave of Chirambahuyu, occupation occurs at such a pace, extraction occurs at such a pace that by the time a local authority comes into that area, they are already very powerful institutions that at times are connected to national government in terms of gatekeeping and making it impossible nearly for local authorities to do development facilitation.
All right. Thank you again, Dr. Chatiza. Very interesting insights in there. Now, as we observe, having said all this, can we say that the migration, as observed, of people from the urban into these rural or so-called rural peri-urban areas has actually solved the challenges in terms of housing? Are the housing needs solved by this migration that has been observed? And our livelihoods, have the livelihood strategies been diversified? Can we say that the lifestyles are now cheaper as afforded by this type of migration? We, as you mentioned earlier on, you mentioned that there's now duality in terms of this migration. There's duality that is observed where people are now making these peri-urban areas dormitory places, and then they commute for their daily work-related travel every day. Now, can we say that the housing needs have been solved or are being solved? Can we also say that the livelihood strategies have been diversified? Maybe Mr. Mabaso, you could respond to that one.
Okay, we wouldn't really confidently say migration has solved the housing problem in Harare. Even if you look at it historically, the housing problem has always been a perennial problem. Migration just adds to the already existing problem in most cases. And it goes back again to the issue of the information management that we're talking of. If we know the trends, for example, people coming either from Seke and the like, where do we have these hotspots of migration and which direction? And it comes again back to the whole issue where when I started, I said, the peri-urban itself is such an amorphous term. In terms when we look at it from a physical point of view, as if people move from one point to the next, as it's defined in terms of the urban planning and spatial physical planning, then it becomes a little bit challenging. But if you look at the social, economic, and cultural drivers, whereby Dr. Chatiza mentioned the duality, whereby there are some people who stay in the rural area, migrate to work in Harare, for example, Miseke and the surrounding area, even Goromonzi, so they've got their houses staying in the rural areas, going to the urban areas. But that really isn't addressed. And it's not like when migration takes place, you find ready services and houses to offer in Harare or within the peri-urban areas. In most cases, it can address one component while people can develop informal houses, but look at them using the services at times of the city of Harare. So it can create another problem that is beyond just the provision of housing. So when we look at it from a holistic point of view, we don't just have to look at what do we mean by offering of housing. What are the other implications in terms of service delivery, the other challenges that come out because of migration, and it could be other issues related to socio-economic challenges that we have. Now, when you talk of livelihoods, yes, there could be diversification of livelihoods, whereby people bring different skills. Dr. Chatiza was talking, of course, of piggery. I give more of Kroyo because I've been in the area for quite some time and know the dynamics and challenges that are there. Private land, is it under Goromons, is it under Harare? And then that master plan might be incorporating that, but practically it is not yet been part of Harare per se. So you'd find that there's so much in terms of diversity, whereby it could be poultry, farming, piggery, sand extraction. But again, it is not only because of those people who come from outside Harare. There could be people from Harare who move to these areas because it's cheaper maybe to be running some small farm or production activity within the peri-urban area with limited monitoring activity there. So you can get a diversification of livelihoods, right, from a historical point of view, but also driven by economic challenges, really, So they're trying to link the causality, say, okay, is it peri-urban that has led to diversification? But the economic challenges at times make people to be innovative, and they move either from the city of Harare to the peri-urban areas, start new type of economic ventures, which are so many, especially the agro-related and some small-scale type of manufacturing. That again comes back to the same issue whereby I was saying, if you were to look at the information management system that looks at all the variables that are drivers of change in growth and development of Harare and the surrounding issues there. What are the main economic activities that have taken place after independence, and what has caused this to really develop? So there can be diversification to a certain extent, but in terms of addressing a number of array of other issues and problems, that can be creating maybe a number of other problems.
Yeah. No, I agree. If I can come in, I agree with what Elias is saying, largely because perhaps at an individual level, one could say they've been squeezed out of expensive housing in Harare, and they found alternative housing outside Harare, and they're still be able to commute to Harare. But I think the strategic point he makes around the sustainability of services provided within Harare when they come there, as well as in Goromonzi when they go there, is a very important question to engage with. Which is why at the end of the day, it ought to be planned a set of settlements that are integrated. The economic activities that are occurring in these two spaces need to be connected, one, as well as contributed to the provision of basic services so that people can have decent lives and decent livelihoods where they are able to access the basic rights in both spaces. So when people come to Harare during the day to trade and go and sleep outside Harare, one of the things that they are not necessarily contributing to effectively is how do they make sure that Harare water, Harare roads, Harare other services are able to be sustained on the basis of their contribution. And when they go to sleep, wherever they go and sleep, how are they contributing to those spaces? So I think it's important for us to say at an individual level, you can imagine someone is staying in an area where they are probably no longer able to afford to pay the rent house. And then they go and set up a decent house for their family using local available materials, and there's no inspection, and therefore the cost may be affordable. That at a household level, that is very, very affordable. They've been able to access housing. But at the level of the settlements into which they are plugging themselves, we are not getting sustainability.
All right.
And it's not getting the regions growing.
Hello, can you hear me? My network is quite bad.
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
we hear you.
The moderator is not on.
Hello. My network is quite, yes. My network is quite bad. Of course, you can proceed. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Mawere to help me when I go offline. But I'm going to read what Tafazwa Hilton Kenny is saying. He says, I think for now we have uncontrolled sale of land with everyone who has a money-seeking intent behind their minds rather than rational spatial mindset, which has created a lot of problems in our towns. He proceeds to say that accompanied with boundary issues and poor population forecasting, there's also been a capacity breach in both local authorities, failing even to provide necessary services as per expectation. All right. Now, maybe as we proceed, Dr. Chatiza, maybe you would like to recommend policy interventions of all. No, before we go to policy interventions, let's look at the promise. What is the promise of this policy, of this peri-urban development in solving any of those issues as highlighted? Is there promise, or it's a futile exercise completely? And is it sustainable?
Okay. Let me just give one or 2 points there. We can be optimistic. It's not like the end all. There are challenges, yes, but if we look at some of the potentials that are there within the area, especially in terms of food production, diversification that we are talking of there, as long as there are systems put in place to promote these activities in a more integrated and contributing towards the development of not only the city of Harare, but also the local authority. So these are areas, we know the urban areas are growing, of course, We cannot avoid that. And urban sprawl is a problem. And so these peri-urban areas become zones that can assist in terms of future growth when there is good planning. And you look at climate change and what is happening, especially in food security. Urban areas could be zones that can be tapped in to improve food security and production. You find the informal agriculture that is taking place in most cases, which is not taken as part of urban land use in some cases, following more of the colonial type of planning, but it is a potential that can be tapped in. And people have taken their own initiative to work on this. But the idea is, are they sustainable? Or they are just people who are taking quick fix in order to meet their immediate needs? And yet, if we are investing much in this, they can contribute towards the growth of the city, both in terms of food security, in terms of even water harvesting and extraction, in terms of micro type of economic activities, in terms of production. So there's a lot of potential in these areas. What is just required is that more systemic way of doing it. And if we are not looking at some of the trends and challenges, of course, the sustainability issue comes into question. And for now, the trend and the direction shows that we might not reach the sustainable level that we want to achieve, because it's almost like a free-for-all with limited governance and other interventions there. But we can't say all is lost. The potential is there, and we cannot also wash away the existence of these areas, which might trigger a lot of possible development.
Dr. Chatiza, your comment?
There's considerable promise. I think what we have just been saying before were the challenges that I think these settlements present, and in terms of the way they are straining the local authorities that ordinarily have the land and planning authority responsibilities. But I think let's look at it differently as well, like Elias is suggesting, because these are new neighborhoods. These are new neighborhoods where citizens of this country are residing, and they've a right to subsist in those areas. But I think by overemphasizing the informality, by overemphasizing the weakness in those settlements, we're forgetting that there are suburbs in the making that with considerable rule of law, particularly planning rule of law, we can upgrade them, we can regularize them and make them into sustainable settlements. There's no harm in making sure that we approach them from that perspective. So there's an opportunity arising from the fact that most of these have demonstrated considerable social organization in terms of the movements of people, because the services that they access, they connect each other, they help each other. So there's a lot of social capital already in those communities that can be mobilized for purpose of planning. The second is also the acknowledgement that we need to realize that whereas in planning schools we're teaching our students based on a greenfield model, where a piece of land which is vacant is converted from rural to urban. Now we are talking about a different conversation where it's brownfield now. You're getting into an area where residents are already there. So your planning literacy becomes different. You need to be able to acknowledge that. So there's an opportunity for our planning students, for our planning practitioners to be taught how to manage urban settlements that are organically developing on their own, and then to infuse some of the principles of planning from a brownfield perspective rather than from a greenfield perspective. So what that means is for planners to then think beyond presenting something that is theoretical to presenting something that is responding to something that is already on the ground. Part of the promise that some of this informal, if you like, but again, that's what capital is all about. We need to understand the sense in which land access has been challenged. The traditional land access model has been challenged in a way. So we need to find a way of learning from the lessons of land access that have occurred in these areas, learning from the access to resources that have occurred in these areas, without necessarily rubbishing all of it, to make sure that we draw lessons for purpose of improving the way we do things. Because the way people ended up accessing this land was a response to constrained access, was a response to access issues that were not really, if you like, socially equitable. So there's been some equity that has occurred in the process. We need to find a way of understanding it and make sure that we capture the positives, but also then discontinue the negatives to make sure that we're able to move forward. So I think we need to build on some of the work that has been done. There's been a commission of inquiry into the management of state land from 2005 to date, and around urban areas. So we need to find the time to look into what they are recommending, so that at the end of the day, like I said earlier on when I started this segment of my contribution, these are potentially new neighborhoods where the residents can be recruited into formal processes of planning, the service and placement, and formal governance participation. It's not all lost. So we need to find a way of making sure that we're able to do that. And that's, for me, the promise. We've always been hearing about Kibera. We've always been hearing about other large-scale informal settlements outside Zimbabwe. Now we have them. Let's find a way of embracing them and making sure that our citizens are not necessarily going to continue to be resentful of the state each time that we think we can't handle informality, we need to destroy. We think we can't replan, we want to evict. We think we can't incorporate ideas from informal settlements, we need to harass people and destroy their infrastructure. Let's find a way of making sure that those that have broken the law are dealt with as individuals, but those that have been victims of some of the laxity in terms of regulation, development and implementation are taken into account as we replan, regularize, and develop our settlements so that everyone feels they're part of this country. They can also contribute to its development. No free services, because you can't have a road if you can't provide for money for it to be developed. You can't have water running out of a tap if you can't provide resources for it. So we need to build on those social organizations in these areas so that we're able to improve them as new neighborhoods that are sustainable, planned, and properly governed.
Thank you, Dr. Chatiza, for such a profound comments. Rumbim Pasho says, is it possible to bring all the actors involved and come up with a workable solution to the challenges in these peri-urban areas when others are benefiting at the expense of the others? That's an interesting question in there. Would you like to respond to that, Mr. Mabaso?
Where there is a will, there is a way. You know, in most cases, you find that there will always be challenges. It doesn't matter whether you are looking at developed cities like New York, where I stay. You know, there are always people who take benefits and at the expense of other people. But is there a goodwill? We're talking of the governance structure right from the beginning there. That is in terms of the institutions, in terms of the enforcement of laws, in terms of if there is laxity from both state level to local authority, then at times it becomes problematic. You know, remember the local authority are governed by particular legal instruments in terms of planning, in terms of facilitating resource extraction. The city of Harare also has got that. So as long as we don't have those enforcement mechanisms, it's not like total impossibility to bring actors together, but you understand the dynamics to the benefit or to the advantage of those people who are affected. It's not an exercise in futility. There will always be people who want to take advantage of it, but how much do we enforce these mechanisms, looking at how do we structure both the governance systems and how do we also link with the state actors, not just currently, you know, there's political expedience in some cases, and then people usually take advantage of weak systems that are in place, and yet there are so many voices of the people, especially the communities, can matter also. When you see that you are not benefiting maybe from the particular resources, how do you organize also at the grassroots level so that it is a top, it is more like bottom-up driven type of initiative and development? And like what Dr. Chatiza said, which I liked, is in time also we got to change our mindset in terms of the planning and approaches, whereby you find there is so much fixation on the colonial mindset type of planning, whereby informality is regarded as a hazard, and yet it can be a drive of resilience and change. And so if the communities understand these variables and use them as entry points, then it is possible to bring together a multiplicity of actors. It's not just looking at the top management people. They are not the ones who drive the change. So we've got to look at it from a diverse point of view, how to bring in a number of players in order to facilitate development. So that is very possible.
Oh yes, and then now as these settlements have been coming up for various reasons, can we say that community, these are citizen initiatives?
Hello, we no longer hear. Wellington is out.
Yeah, Wellington is gone. Yeah.
Can we say
And he had not
that?
completed his question, unfortunately.
Oh, I went offline. It was rebuffing. But anyway, let me read what Tafatwa Hilton Kenny says. Policy and definition of roles is what is crucial in attaining and putting into practice these issues of regularization and tapping into sustainable planning. Now, what I wanted to say was citizen initiatives seem to be at the forefront of this migration that we are observing. Can we then therefore say that community building or building capacity for community building is key? Because it seems that citizens are tending to take matters into their own hands to solve problems that otherwise the usual custodians of development are failing to solve for them.
Okay, I'll make a brief comment on that. Okay, settlement is people, or whether peri-urban or whatever it is, you cannot look at it in isolation as a physical entity. So when you look at people, whether at community level, individual level, they are the ones who drive change in these particular areas. So gone are the days whereby we would need to come out with excellent physical plans, type of master plans that are totally divorced from the social, economic, cultural dynamics, which would determine the trends. And that is one of the reasons why we tended to have these conflicts in terms of informality, because we still have got that beautiful city mentality without knowing how can we tap into this as a social and economic potential for the development of the city. So bringing together various citizens for participation, either in planning, in terms of their social intervention, in terms of, they are the ones who drive change in the area. So there is no way we can have almost a top down. We can come out with all the beautiful plans, but without knowing what are the drivers of change, then it means the plans are bound to fail. That's why I saw one question whereby people are asking, why do we have a market store somewhere in the middle of Mount Pleasant or some other area, or there are market stores that are not even utilized by the people there? How much do we know some of the drivers of change? While we want to enforce proper planning, at the same time, we should understand some of these dynamics within society that will cause a little bit of change. And so there's no way we can run away from community participation. But participation also should be defined in its broadest term. There are people whereby they think, okay, if we consult, that is participation, if we got this. So what do we mean by that community participation, which we should bring about change, not just a token or some type of ancillary way of doing things, and we believe that is community participation, then we don't get to that end there. So in its broadest term, how do we really move community participation to influence change in the since the communities are the ones who utilize the same services?
Dr. Chatiza, your comment on that one?
Yeah, sure. I have a 3:30 appointment, so I'll probably be winding up. My contribution is this. Community development that we've seen in recent years has given the impression of self-provisioning in a manner that I think most that have self-provided thought they can go the whole way. I think we need to be able to educate each other, understand each other, that there is a limit to self-provisioning. And self-provisioning may result in unsustainable processes, including even settlements. So it is important for us to be clear, to have a citizen participation process that acknowledges that there's a lot that an individual can do, there's a lot that a household can do, there's a lot that a neighborhood or a community can do. But beyond that, one community then needs to be connected to the next community for the higher level of services that are required. so that we are able to create more sustainable environments and more sustainable communities. And that is the community. That is where our local authorities come in. Our local authorities are our communities for the areas for which they are defined. So that's why they have a planning, development control, development management responsibility. So our self-provisioning has to be for services that are within the remit of what an individual can do, so that we all work hard. Our constitution even defines that. We're able to do certain things. The spirit of working for oneself is even encoded in our constitution. But we also need to have citizens that are clear, that there are moments, there are services of an order where they need their local authority. There are services of an order where they need the national government, so that we connect those three spheres effectively. Otherwise, we create this impression that a land developer or a land baron, if you like, can have a whole settlement that they have 1,000 stands that they are selling. But where are those 1,000 stands going to be getting water from? Where are they going to be sending their sewerage to? Where are they going to be getting public transport from? Where are they going to be? How are they going to be linked to the next community in terms of economic activities? How many schools are they going to provide on their own? So it is important for us to get that into our communities, but at the same time to also get our local authorities to understand that self-provisioning does not necessarily preclude collaborative planning, collaborative governance, where citizens who are organized and active can also work with their responsive local authority, and as well as a responsive national government. The polarization we have, not just in politics, but also in terms of even facilitating development, needs to be retreated back from, so that we're able to connect communities to their local and national government, so that we're able to have sustainable communities. Because there's a limit to self-provisioning. There's a limit to thinking that you can do a resource extraction and zvangu zvaita. There's a limit to that approach. And I think some of the settlements we have are stuck in that, because they want to get to the next level of services. Now they are even seeing as if there are too many. But the only problem is they need to be organized, connect with the local authority, and then they're able to upgrade the services available on the basis of collective contributions and collaborative planning. So we need to be clear about that, so that we don't create, so that we are able even to restate and reestablish rule of planning law and generally rule of law, so that people know that you can't have sustainable development without a capable government. And capable states are also formed by capable and active citizens. So we need to be able to start working together and building those connections.
All right.
Otherwise, we keep the self-provisioning into unsustainability.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So now I take it maybe that will be Dr. Chatiza's conclusion. In conclusion remarks or concluding remarks, what please conclude, Mr. Mabaso, as we wind up.
Okay. In terms of the conclusion, as a DRR practitioner in most cases, now I believe without a proper disaster risk reduction intervention, development itself becomes futile. And it's very important for us to be considering issues of resilience, sustainability, and the DRR in terms of how we move forward, especially the peri-urban area, which is a zone itself characterized by so much hazard. And as I said, the two critical issues of how do we work with information management systems that calls upon our research institutions, our academic institutions to develop those systems whereby we can easily monitor the changes. Too much hazard. And as I said, the two critical issues of. Okay, I'm not sure what is happening. I hear echoes behind.
But anyway, thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking your time this afternoon to join this inaugural policy dialogue. It has been a useful discussion, and the viewers from wherever they've been viewing, I hope they'll give us feedback so that we move on. But I would like to, as we go, I would like to say that this initiative is convened by the Africa MINDSHIFT Trust, and it's also powered by the C2C initiative and the 18 FM. The C2C initiative convened by people who realized that active citizenship is important in building communities. Let's convert our connections into a community. So if one is connected, say on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and all those platforms, we collectively connections, we become a community with a shared understanding. So as a collective, we tend to do better. So it's very important that you can inbox me later or contact MD Mawere or myself. We can discuss more about active citizenship through the C2C initiative. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining this dialogue. See you next time.
Thank you.